Yeah, some weekend. They're handing it all over. I watched the news shows this afternoon and this weekend, and it's going to be all Iraq, the election, you know. So it's coming around to your bailiwick. You're really familiar with that in an interesting way. And what you've been saying over the years seems to be increasingly borne out by the facts on the ground, as they say.
Nothing has turned up to challenge it.
Yeah. And we ought to maybe take our cue from this JUDE WANNISKI piece that was sent out recently. It's really interesting. Why is Saddam in jail at all? Which is sort of a radical departure from most people's thinking. And welcome. Welcome very much to Conversation, talking with Nita Renfrew, old friend of Conversation and expert in understanding the country of Iraq and the personality in a unique, non-propagandistic kind of manner of that man who's so much in the news, recent news, has written a book called Saddam Hussein, an authoritative biography of the man. And Nita, you've been on many times. Welcome very much to Conversations. It's really very good to see you. And once again, and welcome to the program. Okay, maybe a brief background, if we could. We want to talk about things. We're talking on June 28th of the year 2004. Authorities are about to be handed over. All kinds of things are going on. All the pundits in the press think the major issue in this election is going to be Iraq. But maybe you could share a little bit. You've spent some time over there, and share a little bit of your own background. Maybe we could talk about Iraq and perhaps the person of Saddam Hussein, maybe even from this very interesting article published by JUDE WANNISKI, why is Saddam Hussein in jail at all? But maybe you could share a little of your background.
Well, I went to Iraq the first time in early 85 as a journalist. And we had reestablished relations with Iraq in late 84. If you recall, all of the Arab countries had broken relations with the U.S. after the '67 war, at the time of the '67 war, and they had slowly come back into relations with us. And Iraq reestablished them in 84. I'm saying, back in the 70s. It's the 84. So I went there in 85. And I was really impressed because I had read all these articles about how he was a terrible dictator and you know, the suppression, and I had been told don't call your friends because they'll, you know, if you're over there because you know, the phones are all wired and, you know, it's like they're all tapped and they'll be taken off to be interrogated, and their families may never see them again just because you're a foreigner and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I believed this, and I expected to find a third world country, and I didn't.
And you did not, right?
I did not.
Yeah.
I spent the first few days in the hotel hanging out with the other journalists who were there. Some of them were from our well-known newspapers here, and they all told me the same thing. They said, don't go out without your minder, and don't do this, and don't call your friends, and, you know. And I believed it. I didn't want to get anyone in trouble. So. But after a couple of days, I began to push the envelope.
Good.
And I started to, you know, I went out, and nobody followed me, and nobody told me I couldn't go out and walk around the streets.
Right.
And they had assigned a driver to me. And, you know, you were asking me before about, you know, the minders.
Yeah.
And I was explaining in this country, the State Department has a program of escorts that we provide as courtesy to visiting dignitaries.
Yeah, particularly if there's a language problem.
Yes, and they travel, even if there isn't sometimes. They travel with them around the country. They, you know, take them places. They pay for everything and so on. And I've never heard them called minders. They're called escorts.
Yeah. But minder is a more readily come into the mind if you're thinking it's a police state. They're watching you. They're spying on you.
Well, it's like, you know.
There may be some of that, but,
well,
but it may be here too. Yeah, right.
I mean, you know, it's like, sure.
There's an awful lot of the kettle calling the pot black in these matters. The
thing is, you know, Iraq was in a war with Iran and so on, so I would imagine there was a bit of security consciousness. Look at what we've done, just because there's this supposed threat of terrorism here, all over the place. And
and it's getting worse.
But anyway, what I found was that wasn't true, and I called my friends and I asked them. I said, I don't want to get you, and they thought this was hilarious, you know. And they said, well, you know, we go where we want.
Right.
Pick me up and take me out. And
same thing happened to me. I've been to Libya a number of times. Did an interview with Muammar Gaddafi, and there it was the same, minors, but you know, you can go wherever you want.
I
had a completely different view than that of the propagandistic thing that led Mr. Bush to bomb and
I think they were
that country and kill the leaders, Muammar Gaddafi's adopted daughter. you know, which is not, it's as though they had bombed the White House and killed Chelsea. Oh, anyway, go ahead, yeah, go ahead.
So anyways, you know, and it goes, you know, just all of the terminology that we use, you know, we call, when we refer to where Saddam lives, it's a palace, but, you know, when we talk about where Bush lives, it's a White House. And, you know, I mean, it's like, why don't we talk about the palaces in
Our
Washington?
plutocrats live in palaces, as plutocrats do all around the world, I think, you know. But
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's just a way of making, you know, we talk about a regime over there and an administration here.
Yeah,
and,
right.
You know, I mean,
I suppose all countries do this propaganda,
Yeah.
is to lead their people around and that
so
sort of
why not
thing.
talk about the Saddam administration and, you know, and the escorts that he...
Yeah, right,
I mean,
yeah.
But anyway, I found a very dynamic, a vibrant country. I found a country that was not at all a third world country. People were punctual. They were efficient. They were obviously they were building a country that had been a real backwater, as I understood it, until recently.
They were secularly minded?
Secular, because the Ba'ath Party believed in secular government.
We might be able to tick off the things that Tom Friedman says is the sine qua non of a modern state, is they're modernized, they're secularized, and the women have an important voice.
Which was
all
also
of which
the case.
was characteristic of the situation in Iraq. The women were very, very prominent and just blended right in. I've heard you say even more than here.
More than, well, you know, I found that people were much more respectful of me as a woman there than here. And professionally, I found it's the only country I've ever been in where I felt that there was no difference in the way I was treated. And there was no difference in the way I was treated socially either, unlike here.
Unlike here, you think, even
Unlike
more
here.
than here, in this bastion of, you
So
know,
I was really impressed.
Yeah, you were impressed. I wonder, maybe we could, you were impressed. I wonder, maybe you could help set me straight. JUDE WANNISKI, a serious scholar and so forth, has just published this letter, and it was, why is he in jail at all, talking about Saddam Hussein, and he's making a number of assertions that run. A lot of assertions run counter to the barrage of propaganda that the United States and the world, by and large, has been submitted to in these last years, actually decades, because it goes back to Clinton and other things, but that a lot of those things are being questioned. And he said he was a let's begin, if we could, maybe we could tick some of these things off. He was a duly constituted leader of a country.
That's correct.
And he claims,
recognized by the UN.
Recognized by the UN, not by the United States, but by the world community.
Well, no, the United States did recognize the government. We just didn't have relations with them.
But he was in that position, and it's worth talking about, and that he was in that position, and that, let's just say, even in the case of the war in the Iran, invading of Kuwait, he even said that there was a reason to be read, if we read it carefully, that it was within the context of a presidential responsibility to defend the national interests of Iraq, the invasion of Kuwait, because it was predatory pricing practices, slant drilling and so forth, on the part of the Emir of Kuwait, which was the cause of Bella. It was them who did it, not him.
That was correct.
And also that he has not ever, as he is alleged to have done, thumbed his nose at the UN Security Council resolutions about looking for weapons of mass destruction. He followed those to the letter, saying, I have no weapons of mass destruction, and so forth. And he complied with the UN resolutions. These are two charges that are made in this letter. What do you think about those, and how do you see
Well, it's
them?
true. You see, he balked at some of the resolutions because, you know, at a certain point they wanted to go into his bedroom and so on and search. And, you know, I mean, it's
Let
sort
me
of
look
like...
through your hair for lice.
And people at that time were saying, look, the United States, you know, because we had already attacked Iraq. And, you know, people were saying, the United States wants to go in and find out all of their security mechanisms prior to attacking, which is exactly what we did. And even, you know, what was the name of the inspector who...
Kay or
no, the one who...
Blix, Hans Blix?
No, the one who's been speaking out against...
Scott Ritter.
That's what he said. You know, because he was party to the whole, you know, the CIA infiltration of the team and so on. And he said that indeed, yes, we were looking for... We wanted to breach their security system in ways that had nothing to do with...
oh, I see. Like spying.
we were spying.
We were spying.
Yeah.
We wanted to spy. We wanted to have everything
to spy.
open. Yeah,
I mean, we weren't just looking for weapons of mass destruction. We were trying to breach
It'd
the
be
security
comparable to them
system.
coming in and getting in on that meeting of the energy with Mr.
Exactly.
Cheney, which he won't
Exactly.
allow us to be anybody.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So, which is what the Iraqis were saying at the time,
uh-huh.
and but you know, he did kicking in, but there was a lot of media given every time he would balk, such as at that time when we wanted to go into the palaces, and
those are public buildings.
most of them are public. They're public buildings. Well, the
okay.
White House is a public building too. Yeah,
So
they're
you could
public
call-
buildings.
you could
Nothing
call-
was in none of those palaces. So supposed palaces
Yeah, you
were
could
in
call the
Saddam's
Smithsonian
name.
Institution a palace.
A palace,
I don't
yes.
know. Yeah, I don't. Yeah. Well, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
So everything on the mall, all those buildings on the mall are
Yeah,
palaces.
yeah.
Palace in the word in Arabic, I understand the same word is used for building and palace.
Is it really?
Well, it's like in Italian.
Yeah.
Palazzo
Yeah,
means
palazzo.
palazzo means building. That's the word you would use for a building. Any
okay.
building, an
Yeah.
apartment building or
Yeah.
any kind of a building.
So these things can carry connotation in translation that, that's to be kept in mind.
So it was
right?
being done deliberately.
Yeah,
you
it
know,
was. There's a
by
propaganda
innuendo.
barrage
Yeah,
that's been directed
yeah,
at the man.
yeah.
I wonder if I could go.
But anyway,
go ahead,
so when he would finally comply with
Yeah.
these outrageous demands that we were making,
trying to
that would,
safeguard
you know,
the
that would be
secret-
on page 26
Yeah.
after the, you know, when he was when he was balking was on page 1 for weeks on end.
Yeah.
So the general public would just never become aware of the fact that he had complied in the end to everything.
He had complied.
Yes.
This is what Mr. Wanniski and others who say, if you look at it, he wrote this letter to John Ashcroft and made it public.
Yes, I know.
But he said that if you were to look at these things, and the record would bear him out that was the case, a couple of other things. He has been accused in the public mind of being a butcher and so forth. But he said, say in the case of the Kurds, he had a little aside in there saying that the Kurds, is it true? Maybe you could direct, you know the history. The Kurds sided with Iran in the war?
Many of the Kurds
Yeah.
sided with Iran. They were a fifth column during the war.
That would be like, fifth column. It would be
Meaning,
like
meaning they really were a fifth column,
Uh-huh,
unlike the Japanese here
Yeah.
and during World War II. who
But he
were
also
not.
made the claim that there are claims that there are hundreds of thousands or something of deaths of Kurds and so forth. The Halabja thing.
They
comes
haven't
up.
found any
But
of
he
that.
said they haven't found anything.
found
And he said if
anything.
you go to Human Watch, Human Rights Watch,
They
you
say
know,
they're
so
still looking.
They would sheepishly say, they're still looking for
Yeah.
those claims of
Yeah.
great numbers of death that are not the case. Another fabrication in a
Yes.
certain sense. Does
Yeah.
that square with your understanding of
It
the
does.
situation?
And I will say that, however, that he was ruthless with his enemies, and his enemies were many. The Kurds who were the separatists, and not all Kurds are separatists, by the way. The Kurds are fight with each other too,
Yeah.
and they're Shiites and they're Sunnis and they're ones that are separatists, and then there's always a third of the Kurds that sides with whoever's in power, the monarchy or the Ba'athis or whatever, and then there's like a third in the middle that aren't with anyone.
I understand this Alawi is kind of ruthless too.
Well, you know,
Yeah, we got a piece of the New York
what's
Times. It was
interesting.
in the Times today, the
This is
newspaper of
what's
record.
interesting.
This is the fellow who's going to take over. I guess
He's the
Bremer.
premier.
It was supposed to be the 30th. It's already been handed over, I guess, as we speak, and
The
this won't air
premier,
until
yeah.
the 5th of July. But
This is
yeah,
the
maybe
premier.
it's worth going to.
Yeah, this is what
This is the guy what's going to be taken
the
over.
New York Times says today. Senior Bush administration officials in Washington say they have put great faith in Dr. Alawi because they regard him as battle-hardened, politically adept, and perhaps even ruthless politician who understands the meaning of force in Iraq's rough terrain. Alawi is a tough nut, said a senior administration official. That is to the good. And then, you know, it says, you know, that, I mean, it is another part of the article that says that some think he is perhaps more of an autocrat than you know, a democracy-loving politician. So I don't, you know.
This is what they accuse Mr. Saddam Hussein of. Yeah.
It could be a description of Saddam Hussein.
And the political opposition to him is, another program, but it's worth noting, is that it's true. There were people who were very opposed to him, just as there are very many people who were opposed to Ronald Reagan when he was the president. We had a 65% approval rating. If you went to the people on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, they would think Ronald Reagan was the worst thing since you know, there was nothing like that.
Bill
or
Clinton,
people
the same
now,
thing.
Bill Clinton, if you went to
the
Kenneth
Democrats
Lay, they would
loved
say,
him.
or the people.
The Republicans hated him. Or George Bush now. If someone came here and talked
Ask,
to Michael Moore, They
about
would
what he
think that
thinks of him.
everybody in this country hates George Bush.
Yeah, right.
But
And
if
with
they
the
talk,
passion.
Yeah. But if they talk to what's his name on Fox TV, I mean,
One of the people on Fox,
I mean,
yeah.
I mean,
Whoever, yeah.
They'd
the
say,
Repub-
"Gee, Americans adore George Bush."
That's right. So
And
there's that
so
political.
there's a polarization.
There's a polarization there in Iraq as there is here, and so forth.
And there was under Saddam in Iraq.
And another thing, even we did on another program one time. Since we're talking and taking our cue from JUDE WANNISKI in a certain sense, that he kept the Union together. You had four. You had a thing
together.
in a certain sense. I know at the time. I just saw Mario Cuomo's got a new book out about Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was greatly hated in his time, and if you had gone to people there at the time of that Civil War, you would have had some really intense kind of things being leveled at the man, and yet he kept the Union together, and as did Tito in Yugoslavia.
As did Tito, yeah.
But, I mean, so he might be able to be seen as, like, in a certain sense for Iraq, like an Abraham Lincoln figure, perhaps.
In that
and
sense,
he's
yes.
in prison with
Yes.
people going through his hair looking for lights.
And it's true.
And
the country was polarized in much the same way that it was here during the Civil War.
Uh-huh.
You know, with the Southerners were fighting
Yeah.
the North. I mean,
Had
there
that
was a
James
war.
Booth.
And Saddam Hussein was able to keep the country out of civil war,
Yeah.
which was a great feat.
He was also a great bulwark against the Khomeini regime in Iran, against
all the religious, you know, the pro-religious government people in all that part of the world.
Yeah. Did we already talk about the fact that the country was secular? If we were to
Secular.
talk, did we talk about that already? I don't know.
No, I don't
Tom
think so.
Friedman's list of, he says, new countries is
Yeah.
that a country, what they have to do is become modernize. They have to modernize. And here was Iraq, a high literacy, a secular country.
Secular country.
Huge given over of of rights to the women, more so even than here,
yeah.
and about to be declared a first world nation
Well,
by
the UN
United
actually
Nations.
did rate it on a par with Portugal.
Okay.
In '89 or 90.
So it had all the
yeah.
criteria that Mr. Friedman
Yeah.
is supposed to say is that which is needed for a modern state, but
Exactly.
also carrying with that modernization and that progressive kind of attitude, economics and so forth, means that they begin to have some power
Yeah.
rather than being very easily manipulated by the mutual fund guys or the neo liberal banking community, the neo-capitalist banking community.
You hit it on the nail.
So that's the problem.
That's
and
what we
also
don't want.
this Ba'athi, if I may, the Ba'athi party, which was eliminated, now they're apparently going to be brought in and so forth, and it's a real mix-up. Bremer dismissed
Well, most of the
them all.
modern
But the
people in the
Ba'athi
country
party-
were Ba'athis or Ba'athi sympathizers.
And the Ba'athi party was pan-Arab.
It's pan-Arab.
And also, one last thing is, he was resolutely supportive of the Palestinian cause on the
That's
West
true,
Bank, right?
yes.
So all of those things, but particularly the things that Tom Friedman will tick off, they all seem to apply to Iraq under
They all
Saddam
apply.
Hussein.
He was our natural ally
Mhm.
in the region, which is the irony of the whole situation.
Mhm.
And he wanted to be our ally, and the Iraqis wanted to be our allies.
Mhm.
Now, in that vein, I want to talk about something I saw last night on television. I saw a Time magazine correspondent who has apparently been following the, quote, insurgents, unquote.
Yeah. It's
you
most
know.
all the nation, I think. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I
Go
mean,
ahead.
anyway, we call
Go
them
ahead.
I don't know how
Yeah.
you can be an insurgent in your own country if you're
Well,
fighting
what
against
did-
an
what would-
invading force.
I wanted to ask you, in Vichy France, the people who were of the liberation, what were they called? Were they, I suppose the Nazi forces called them, the occupying forces
The
called
Nazis
them.
would
I
have
know
called
they
them
did in the
insurgents.
Balkans. In the
Yeah.
Balkans, Tito and those fighters in the hills, they called them terrorists.
Yeah, exactly.
And because they were trying to claim a legitimacy
call themselves
or
the
in Vichy
partisans,
France.
yeah.
Now we're setting up a Vichy government in Iraq.
Setting up a
I don't know if it holds or not. And then also the Diem in Vietnam, they were setting up a government, that sort of
Exactly.
thing. And that's the thing we really want to be careful to avoid, is going down that path.
Yeah, we're
But-
putting in a premier who is known to have a long-term close relationship with the CIA. If that's not another Diem type situation, I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Or like the Vichy government that the Germans put in France.
Well, that may be overdrawing.
No, it
it,
is not overdrawing
But
it. How
Mr.
is it
Winni-
overdrawing
But
it?
I don't know. I'm just saying.
It's not overdrawing at all.
Well, it's overdrawing it in the face of the barrage of propaganda that has been launched by particularly the neocon groups, and then the groups that they're, Chalabi and others that were expatriates who were to be the people who were in opposition to Saddam. So everything is tainted through that kind of a
Definitely.
a prism as far as this thing that's going. And we have to begin to start thinking, journalists have to be thinking, maybe there's a big story here about how we have been massively, the world has been massively misled.
Well, anyway, this guy Ware, I believe, was his
Yeah.
name that I watched last night, who has been, he was presumably following the insurgents. He said something very interesting. He said that he had seen a real switch in what their goals were over the last 6 months.
You mean the insurgents?
What we call the insurgents,
Yeah.
meaning the freedom
They
fighters.
would call
or the
themselves freedom
insurgents or the
fighters, I'm sure,
partisans
against
or-
this
yeah.
illegal occupation.
He said that 6 months ago they were basically fighting, you know, for the Ba'ath Party ideals. They were fighting for Iraq to be a sovereign country again, to get rid of the occupiers, and they were thinking in terms of Iraqis and no foreigners. And he said that as the Ba'ath Party resources that had been, you know, squirreled away dried up, they began taking money from foreign groups. And most of these foreign groups are Islamist. They're religious foreign groups that want to see Islamic governments in all those countries.
Chalabi took a lot of money from us. And so did
Chalabi also took a lot of money from Israel.
Okay, yeah. But so from that side, there's a lot of money going into it.
But anyway,
in fact, it's draining our treasury.
These people who were the Ba'athis, you know, he said that now they are no longer
just
fighting for Iraq and for restoration of sovereignty to Iraq. That now they are fighting for an Islamic government in that part of the world. And that you know that it's no longer possible. He said it is not possible to negotiate with these people because there isn't anything that we have that they want. They just want to get rid of us. Period. So if that's true, what we've done is we've helped Khomeini's dream of an Islamic, you know, of one Islamic government over all of the Muslim states to become true.
Yeah, right. Well, that, in a Shia model, or
in the Shia model, well, it'll you know it'll be mixed because Al Qaeda is not Shia, but Iraq has you know, most of the pro-religious people there are Shias. So I don't know. He didn't make the distinction, but it's a very dangerous thing that we've let force. And, you know, it just goes to show, you know, it's like, because that's what happens everywhere. When people become desperate, they turn to organized religion and this kind of thing. Because they have nothing else. And, of course, when we went in and we said, well, the Ba'athis are not going to be allowed to take part in anything, and we systematically went around, you know, getting rid of them in all these parts. So, I mean, when you do that, you give people no way out. They're going to fight against you to the death. And it's as if somebody came in here and said, well, anybody who has ever been a member of the Republican Party, or
fair game.
sympathetic to them, or has friends that are members of, or worked for any of them, they're no longer going to have a job. Not going to be able to be part of the government. I can't. I mean, you can imagine what would happen.
That kind of thing. And we've had these people, the pundits on the air. We got Anonymous now, and the State Department's put this new thing out, the book that everybody's talking about. And even Mr. Powell says he doesn't know who it was, but it was somebody. It must have been allowed to be leaked. He's on the news, and he's saying it was like a tremendous. The whole invasion notion, the whole neocon drummed-up thing, was just like a huge Christmas, Hanukkah, you know, Eid gift to Osama bin Laden, because it was leading right into a situation that was going to lead to tremendous grief. And then there was another person who came out and he said that the situation that is emerging, or is likely to emerge, Mr. Wolfowitz saying everything's going to be fine notwithstanding, is that Saddam Hussein was a very workable kind of person compared to what he would make him look like a
Saddam Hussein was very pragmatic,
yeah.
and he also was a man of his word. And I remember before '91 when the barrage of propaganda started about him really seriously. I mean, in the Arab world, everybody, you know, even people who didn't like him, said he's a man of his word. And I remember I have a friend who worked for one of the big oil companies here. And, you know, he says that when he went to Iraq to sign contracts, that it was different from every other country. One, there was no corruption. It was the only place that he didn't have to grease anybody's palms.
Really interesting.
And two, he said they didn't sign contracts because the Iraqis said, look, a contract is only as good as the man who signs it. So
yeah,
they
I think
said,
that's the tradition, yeah.
and they said, no, but in all the other countries
Yeah.
they had to sign contracts and lawyers and so on. And the Iraqis said, look, if we sign a contract and you don't want to keep it, there's nothing we can do about it. And if you sign a contract and we don't want to keep it, you can't enforce it either.
So let's just make sure we do right by
so it was
each
a
other, yeah.
handshake,
Shake
and he
hands
said they never had any
over a
problems.
cup of coffee. Yeah, that's a thing that's really good and able to be had. But it's part of a barrage, a campaign, a barrage that had been directed at him. So
And they haven't, you know, they charged with him with having all this money and everything. I mean, they haven't found anything.
they haven't found anything along the
No.
lines of some Swiss bank accounts or something like that?
Haven't
Yeah, they found
We would have heard about them if they had. You better believe we would have heard about them.
So the picture that's emerging, your book, Saddam Hussein, was read by the people at the agencies
Yeah.
and in the intelligence agency
Yeah.
because it was sort of in a sense authentic. You would think there's some people
It
who
was
would want
considered to be objective.
yeah, and you would want to have some people who would have an authentic idea of the truth rather than the propagandistic thing.
yeah.
But we've been submitted to a tremendous propagandistic thing that has cost us very heavily in lives. We've got 800 lives of ours we've lost. There's probably 60, 70,000 Iraqis have been killed now. We've torn up the country and so forth. No weapons of mass destruction, no connection to Al-Qaeda or that sort of thing. And here we are going to hand it over, and there's an insurgency. Do you think the insurgency is, as Mr. Bremer and Mr. Wolfowitz will tell us, you know, a few dozen people who just happen to be, or do you think it spreads throughout the whole society and the society beyond Iraq as well? I mean,
Well,
and that's
you know,
one of the things that there's a
I'd like
real
to-
general
I'd
insurgency
like
and
to
uprising.
talk about the corruption that going to war against Iraq has brought to this country.
All right, fine.
You know, I mean, it's like this whole thing about the torture of the prisoners.
At Abu Ghraib.
You know,
yeah.
this is a corruption of ourselves, of our own people.
Right.
You know, to put our own people into a situation where they're going to be corrupted, their morals are going to be corrupted.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, when you saw those photographs of those young men and those young women glowering over these tortured prisoners and so
Yeah.
on, you know, I was really sick to my stomach.
You were, yeah.
Because I never,
sadism.
you know, they reminded me of the photographs that they used to show us of the Nazis gloating over the prisoners.
Yeah,
and
well,
so on.
in that case, it were Jews.
Yeah.
They could humiliate Jews.
Exactly.
And they would do it, and they would
and
tear
here are
down
these people smiling.
Kristallnacht and all of
here
that.
we were doing the same thing.
But this was Arabs.
Yeah.
So they seemed to be a target
It was
now.
okay.
It used to be on the American
Yeah.
frontiers, it was the Indian.
And it was
No
Indians
good
at
Indian
one time.
except a dead Indian.
But we didn't have
and
photographs
the
of
racism
that sort of
is
thing.
very very strong in that vein, yeah. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
So, you know, I watched, and I mean, that just makes me sick because, you know, everybody knows that you know, that when there's a war, and even when there isn't a war, the American forces have tortured people, and they've taught other, you know, police forces and militaries to torture and so on. But it was never, nobody ever made an attempt to put a legal face on it.
Right.
It was, you know, it was sub rosa, and it was something that they didn't want to admit, but, you know, it's like, but all of a sudden, I remember a few years ago, Alan Dershowitz
Yeah.
was the
He
first
was
person.
arguing that we should have torture for the Palestinians.
Yes, and
Yeah.
I believe
There's a desperation coming out of that West Bank mess,
Well,
too, I
no,
think.
but he was arguing that we should have a constitutional amendment in this country
uh-huh.
and legalize torture here,
Yeah.
and that, you know, because it's wrong to torture people illegally, but that if we made it so that judges could send out
Yeah.
warrants for torture to people and
Right.
so on. And I thought, what a corruption of American ideals. I
Well, you
mean,
got the ticking
know,
bomb thing. Suppose you got 20 hours before the bomb goes off that's going to destroy all of Manhattan. You got a ticking bomb thing. By God, you're not going to stand on something. You're going to just beat the bejesus or
the
do
problem
whatever.
is
You understand
that once
that?
you allow that,
Yeah.
then everything can be a ticking bomb.
Yeah, right.
If you want it to be.
Well, that's what they're
You
doing,
see,
perhaps with
and
the
that's the
terrorism
reason
thing.
that Thomas Jefferson and those people did not believe in these things.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, the thing is, you know, you sit there and what's more important, your own integrity or your life? And I would say that your own integrity is more important ultimately.
You
Yes.
think so? Yeah.
I think, yes, because you
What
know,
are you talking about in terms of who?
in
oh,
terms
of
of
a
a country,
national
of a
character.
of a
yeah.
national character.
I see,
yes.
of a national character,
Of a
not
national
an individual
character.
who submitted to it. I think anybody would have to bow to torture in a certain dimension? If
Oh, I don't agree.
you think there are
No.
people who could just let themselves be slowly roasted to death?
Oh,
something,
oh
and
no,
not
I
give-
thought you meant bow to doing it.
No, no, no.
No, no,
I mean,
no,
I
no.
mean the other side. I think you could just
Oh,
get
yes.
anything out of anybody
Oh,
if you
I think so.
deprive them.
But the problem is, you
you
see,
know.
that's exactly the point.
But
you
then
do
you
get
also
anything.
you get
and it's not
anything that you
necessarily
put
the
in their
truth.
head.
It's
So it's
not
like having
necessarily the truth.
having a Charlie McCarthy. you
People
know.
are going to tell
They'll
you
say
anything
at
they
all.
want. Yeah.
You want me to say I'm a son of a bitch? I will. You
Yeah,
know, whatever
yeah.
you say. Yeah, that'll happen, and
You
that
know.
can resolve, and it does. And the passions are running high. And you got people like
So we have
Newt
this-
Gingrich was on the other day, and
Yeah.
he said, "Well, what we're fighting for is we've got civilization itself is on the line now against this brutality and this barbarism, and they're beginning to put
But
it
you
in
see,
those terms."
what has happened is that we've destroyed our own civilization, our own civilized, that civilized part
Well,
of
we're
ourselves.
certainly eating away at it. That's why
We're
Mr.
eating away at
Winniski
it,
directed
yeah.
that.
Meaning
at-
we're destroying what remained of it.
That's
When
why
I s-
Winniski directed that at Mr. Ashcroft.
When I
that
saw
letter.
those photographs of those, I mean, I used to be a big women's liver back in the
Yeah.
early 70s.
Yeah.
And when I saw the photographs of these young women in military uniform, because we fought for that,
Yeah.
you know, to be accepted in the military
Women
forces
can
and
do
so
it
on.
too, huh? Yeah,
And
they're
when I
not
saw
just the
that
Venus.
and these the smiles and everything, I thought, you know, was it worth it?
Jude-
Is everything we've been fighting for worth it? And I really felt, in a way, like a beginning. And I'm wearing black
Yeah.
because I'm really in mourning for my country.
Really, you
Yes.
feel that strongly? That
I feel
yeah.
that the country, you know, I've said this many times. The country that Thomas Jefferson and those people founded has gone.
Mhm.
But I really felt it when I saw those photographs, and I
Uh-huh.
just feel, I don't know, my stomach gets tied up in knots just
I
thinking
think a lot
about
of the world did too. And
what we have done
certainly-
to ourselves. But yes,
Well,
but
you
I'm
see,
thinking,
it's-
but
yeah,
I'm not.
yeah.
I'm not looking. Meaning, it's terrible enough in
Yeah.
terms of what those people suffered and
Yeah,
so on.
yeah.
But in terms of what we've done to ourselves,
Uh-huh.
to our own nation, to our
Uh-huh.
own young people,
Mhm.
I mean, those people can never go out and be normal young
Mhm.
people with a sense of integrity and so
Ye-
on. And, you know, it's like the whole thing, you know, when that happens, it corrupts the whole fabric of the country because
Mhm.
now, you know, we've had a lot of prison abuse in this country. And
We've
this-
got 2 million people in prison, and there's
and
a lot of
when you
abuse
see
going
that,
on. A lot
when
of
you see that, and when you see those
sadism.
memos that the White House, I mean, the White House counsel was putting together memos that were, you know, saying things like, well, it's not torture if it doesn't cause lasting harm, meaning months or years of
Uh-huh.
a psychological or physical
Yeah.
nature, meaning to the organs, you know.
Yeah.
Meaning that if you put out cigarettes on someone,
Yeah.
that's not
Or set
torture.
the dog loose on them.
Yeah, or set the dog.
Yeah.
And then he
With
said,
their hands tied behind
yeah,
their back.
and so it's not. And then
Sleep
even if
deprivation
it
can
does
be
give you permanent effects, if the person torturing you didn't
Mhm.
have that intent, then
Mhm.
it's still not torture. So you see, just think of what the prison guard in Timbuktu, Oklahoma, is
Mhm.
thinking.
Yeah.
Who you know really wanted to put out a cigarette butt on someone
Yeah,
who he
sure.
thinks is really terrible and is a
Yeah.
threat to society.
Creeping
and
in,
so
I
on.
think. It's creeping
You know, I mean,
in. It'll
you know,
creep
he looks
in
at
here.
that and it's like, it's okay to do any
Or
of
the
this.
sadistic attitude of anyone within a bureaucracy where they've got absolute authority. Control freaks all over the world can say, hallelujah, let's stomp the face of those people like George Orwell said
Yeah.
is the face of fascism, is stomping forevermore. And also, there's an interesting twist, if I could, on that Abu Ghraib thing, because they said, and so it's Saddam Hussein's Abu Ghraib thing, and he said, could have well been, but now in the case of our doing it, George Bush is trying to say he didn't do it. It was just some renegade lower.
Exactly, yeah.
Could have been the same under Saddam Hussein. There could have been some people doing things like that under Saddam
No.
Hussein, but we never take that
No
view
head
of
of
it.
state writes memos ordering torture.
That's right.
I mean, it's like.
But again, it's
Idi
kettle
Amin
corn.
didn't do that.
Okay,
I
now
mean,
we've
it's
got a
like-
thing. I saw another
Yeah.
thing, if I could, just the over the news program, Meet the Press, and all that sort of thing. And it's amazing to me. Maybe you can help set it straight. Election coming up in about 4 months, big election, and that sort of thing. And you've got, they went from, I don't have it exact, but I think it's just about correct. It was something on the order of 20 to 25 percentage points in terms of the American population. It was Pew, I think, a really reputable poll. Do you think the invasion and the war in Iraq was worth it? And it had dropped 23 percentage points, I think, down to something like 38%
Well, but
of the
that's-
American
but I-
population from having been well over
One of the
a
thi-
huge
is that
diminution. And there was another one, I forget what it
They've
was.
told
but it
they've
went-
told us that it's going to cost every household something like $3,600.
That's going to hurt. Yeah, it's going to cost, and lives, and people are lives. And Do you sense a big shift going on? I mean, and what is it?
Well,
The stakes are high. You got Mr. Gingrich said
okay.
it's the war for civilization, and everything's going to fall
The problem
apart
that I see with
if we
the
leave.
shift, the problem that I see with the shift is that it's shifting towards the Democrats, who are equally bad.
Yeah, right.
You see,
Okay.
and I mean, it's like, I mean, Madeleine Albright.
Equally bad?
Yes. Well, Clinton was the one who wanted to nuke Baghdad.
She was on Meet the Press, and they tried to get at
And
Mitch McConnell, and he's saying, "Oh, we're much safer in the world." And the question is, do you think we are safer now after the invasion that we go to get these people? And that was a slide down to about 30%.
Margaret Thatcher wrote an article, I don't know, a year or so ago, I believe, where she said that, you know, that we would have gone into Afghanistan after 9/11 in the same way that George Bush did, and that we would not have gone into Iraq immediately because we wouldn't have considered it such an immediate security risk. So, I mean, you know, and look at John Kerry. He says he's going to add, what is it, 40,000
troops. He wants to put troops, yeah, to do that, to bring.
So
yeah,
what's the
because
difference?
it reminds me a little bit.
Listen,
Go
the
ahead.
Homeland Security was a brainchild of the Democrats. Gary Hart led a commission under Clinton, in which they, you know, they studied the threat of terrorism, and they decided that we had to have a Homeland Security, and that's what they called it.
Well,
and I watched him on television the other day, and he said they didn't listen to us when we came out with this idea.
Well,
Gary
okay.
Hart.
Yeah, Gary Hart. Yeah, I know. They're saying that. Well, okay. There's a lot of things about that because the whole world is under a sort of spasm of some sort of a thing that's going on. One would hope that it's some sort of because you know you got the possibility of having containers with bombs that go off, and the hatred is growing.
There's more and more
of the
a
United States.
You know, if you go in and stir up hornets' nests all over the place, then that becomes a real possibility.
We go out and kick over everything in the market and do that, and then people get upset, and people are really. The approval level.
The Bathies had never done anything to us,
yeah,
to our
that's what
interests.
they said. He was fairly well able to be dealt with. He would make, you know, that kind of thing. But
they had no interest in not selling us oil.
And they said that it was the Kurds who were collaborating with Iran in the war, and so that there's a whole series of things that he asserts there. Ends up by saying, I don't even understand why the man is in jail at all.
And the Shiites were collaborating with, the religious Shiites were collaborating with Iran.
But I mean, in the case of Saddam Hussein, why is he in jail at all? And do you think there's a chance he might emerge on the Arab front, or let's say Islamic front, which is wider afield, and then you could even go on and say just on a broader front against the power of the neo-capitalists who are running the world and so forth. Do you think there's a chance there's going to be a general uprising against the legitimacy of the assumed order that our leadership
but I think it's going
assumes is there to stay, and that the system itself could come under assault, like feudalism came under assault with industrialization?
But it's going to be the religious Shiites wanting to take the Middle East back to the Middle Ages that are going to come to the fore.
Okay, you don't see a connection with let's say radical elements in Latin America and in Central Asia and other parts, Africa, and that there will be a general uprising.
It's going to be the religious Islamists that are going to. Meaning, you know, we have since the time of Nasser, we have.
There was another
Pan-Arab.
Pan-Arab.
Point by point, we have decapitated every government in that part of the world that was Pan-Arab. And the Pan-Arab nations were the ones that wanted to be modern, secular, they wanted to be friends with the United States and so on. And we've done it systematically, and this was the last one. Syria still has a Ba'athi government, but it's a different, you know, it's a different, they don't have oil, so I mean that's next.
Yeah, right.
And you know, like this man Michael Ware said yesterday, you know, these people have now become rabid Islamists, where they were Ba'athis, because you see, because these people saw the hypocrisy of what we're saying, because the Ba'athis were what we say we want.
That's what it seemed to me.
You see? So these people are, you know, they're saying, well, they obviously don't want that, so let's become, you know, let's turn to God, and let's have a jihad and get rid of these goddamn crusaders.
Yeah, well, there might be people like that on a wider field than just Islam.
But it takes people who have the motivation of a fanatic to do something like that, and the Ba'athis were too moderate in a way.
You don't think there's a thing like on February 15th we had millions of people all over the world met peacefully and so forth to protest this war, which has now, I think it's fair to say, has been built upon on sand. The whole premise by which this war was started in Iraq, the national
But it was
result.
obvious, you know, the information was all out there before, Harold, for anyone who wanted to see it. It was there. Meaning, I don't know, just read you could have read my book.
Yeah.
And
Which
said, well,
book about Saddam Hussein?
My biography of Saddam Hussein.
Could have read The Shooting Edge, too.
You could have read my manuscript that I haven't published. I mean,
yeah.
it's all there. It's not like the information is not out there. It's all out there,
but
and it's easily easily accessible.
But by the people who are the spinmeisters and that sort of thing, it's selected. And we had a group here in the United States, Mr. Wolfowitz and so forth, who were intently focused on this particular view of how this world is going to be done geostrategically. And I think, are they going to become... What's going to happen? Do you think his view that they're going to accept this government, this Vichy government, that America's going to impose 100 and 200,000 troops? And is there a danger that we're going to go down Vietnam route? We lost, remember, 58,000 Americans died before we finally took the last helicopter out of Saigon and so forth. And something between 3 and 4 million Southeast Asians were decimated with napalm and things like that in a terrorist attack upon those people. Are we going to have to go to that kind of an extreme in order to pursue the vision that whatever Wolfowitz has? And in the end, Mr. McNamara now tells us, we did all of that. Our hands, that's terrorism. We did that, and we did it but we made a mistake.
But you see,
and there's nobody in the dock for that.
That's what makes me fear that we're going to use nuclear weapons. Because if we use tactical nukes, you see, short of using tactical nukes, that's what's going to happen. So somebody's going to say, well, for the benefit of mankind and
no,
this
for
world,
civilization. That's what Nick
for
Granger,
civilization.
we're fighting for civilization.
You know, we have to, you know, we made a mistake and everything, but we can't, you know, you can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again.
Yeah.
So the best thing to do now is to just nuke the whole area, nuke these people into submission.
Area after area after area, wherever that rises. You had the New York Times saying we had the United States of America, let's say, that's the legitimate hour. That's like Louis the 16th. And they're saying we're legitimate. We have the International Monetary Fund, the World Order, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization. It's serving well us 20% who live in our palaces around the world and so forth. The people aren't. There's too much evidence that it's not serving the masses. The trends in this country are very much going against the weak and the poor. $2 trillion tax cut to the upper 1% in our country is setting the tone for the world and that sort of thing. Do you think there may not be a glimmering of that coming back to this country too, as the alienation begins to set up and people start realizing their pensions have undercut, there's no security and so forth, that there might be a general uprising against the legitimacy of the system that asserts itself as legitimate, and they've not got the system in place that is able to serve the needs of the masses of the people in terms of what the future requires, rather than just being stuck in a historical, outmoded paradigm.
I think they're planning to nuke people in this country too.
Okay, you think that, right?
You know, if you have a tactical nuclear weapon that you can use it on one square block, or you know, and it's not going to destroy the building, so you can use. I mean, it's very tempting to use if you think you're doing it for civilization.
Well, that's what we did in Vietnam.
So
we thought we were doing that in Vietnam against godless communism.
And we didn't have those things at that time.
Well,
and
we did.
Well, yeah, but there was a real taboo about it.
Kissinger wrote a very important book in 1954 about the use of tactical nuclear weapons. That's been a very important question.
We didn't have these mini nukes.
And it's now being discussed with such abandon. It's just frightening.
We didn't have the sophisticated mini nukes that we have now. These tiny ones that were containable and so on. So, you know, it's Pandora's box.
And what's going to, okay, you've had some experience, you've given some thought, you've got a lot of contacts and people in that part of the world. Here it is, the 28th. Mr. Bremer's already handed authority over to Mr. What's his name? Alawi?
No, that's not today, is it?
No, this is the 28th.
Oh, yeah.
Today. But I think Bremer, ahead of time, I saw in the New York Times, he's handed over the authority and they're off. And so their idea is that, okay, we've handed it over to this government that we've set up, and we've got 156,000 troops to back them. We did that with Diem in Vietnam.
Exactly.
So what do you think is going to happen? Are the Iraqis going to settle in and realize the good reasonableness of our position? And
they're not going to accept.
And are they all in favor of us?
They're never going to accept American puppets.
They were known to be real fighters.
You know, look at what they did with the British. You know, the two countries that the British could never, they couldn't get into Afghanistan, and they could never hold Iraq, which is a much smaller country. They couldn't. They kicked them out.
So
And they kicked out. You know, they got rid of the monarchy in Iraq, even though they were, you know, Hashemites and descendants of the Prophet Muhammad's tribe and so on, because they'd been installed by the British. The Iraqis never stomached that. So it took them, you know, it took them what, 20 years, 20-some years to do it, and they did it. But they got the British out directly within the first few years.
Yeah, and we had to finally leave Vietnam, didn't we?
We left Vietnam.
We took a lot. We took all the. We had 500, 600,000
We
troops
took our
over there,
losses.
killing everything that moved, and so forth. We did that, trying to, what these fellows are going to try and do to get some reasoning. And one of the things you want to try and do in that process is to humiliate those people.
You want to
humiliate them. Humiliate them. And Thomas, and we do it at Abu Ghraib, and that goes. That's the thing we're trying to do, and we're going to do that. And it's like that kind of thing in terms of in other parts of the world where there's a conflict between the rich and powerful. You know, the Louis XVI troops or something like that, and then the people. I'm just wondering if there could be a real stirring. We had communism as a force in Vietnam that we were fighting. What is it that we're fighting now? It seems to me it might be that we don't have a system that can serve.
We're fighting for world domination.
Yeah.
Okay. And of course, you see, the other scenario is that Europe is becoming a united Europe now.
Yeah, they are united.
And what's going to happen?
Can that be a countervailing force to us?
Well,
do you think,
I think so. You know, I think we were better off when we had the Soviet Union, because it was a deterrent to both sides to have another superpower.
So we're just building empire there, and now there is something to be said. You know, Auguste Comte or something, and we've come 200,000 years. We've come this way. We've evolved to where we've got these developments. We got cures. We got all kinds of capability to do all kinds of technologically beneficial things for everybody. We have a capability to provide for everybody in the world. At the same time, we have a capability to destroy the whole human species, which is unique and so forth. But we don't have a system that is in place that is adequate to what the future requires. There's a new big change required that's going to come out of this. There's a big wind blowing in the world, and there's going to be enough reaction by the masses, not just the Arabs, not just the Islam, but the masses of the world. Is that too idealistic or too unrealpolitik to think that the people of the world are maybe going to have something to do with what's actually going on, whereas they've always just been led around by the nose by certain leaders, whether they were kings or our plutocrats that lead the people around with a vision that is not worthy of being followed?
The problem is that what we have now is a situation where the pressure is continuing to build. And when the pressure continues to build, it's going to explode. Meaning, I don't see anything out there that's even making an attempt to defuse the situation. It's just getting more and more polarized inside the country, between countries, everything.
Is it along class lines or not? Is
no,
it class?
It's not along
no,
class
you don't
lines,
think.
no.
What is it? What is the?
Meaning
what
it's
is the
partially,
friction?
but it's it's partially along. It's power. It's outright power. You know, but it's I don't see it.
So we had Marxism. That was the thing that took so much of
Yeah.
that heartland under its sway and so forth, and that didn't work. Now we have this free market capitalism. Is it fundamentalist capitalism on this side against something?
Well,
and could it work? Maybe Mr. Bremer's right, and maybe Mr. Friedman is right, and maybe Mr. Whoever they are, Gingrich is right. We represent civilization, and by God, you people better get used to it. It's a modern world. Learn to groove in a supermodern world, and if you don't learn, we'll beat you into where you will accept that things are getting better.
Civilization came from Iraq.
That's
right. It came from Sumeria.
Yeah.
And they know that. They're very aware of that.
Yeah.
And I would say that an Iraqi would say to you, well, you know, we've been around we've had civilization for 5,000 years.
Yeah.
So, you know, we'll wait a while longer and it'll come back around.
So what's going to happen in the short term, do you think? Do you think the
Something has to
insurgency
give.
is going to get worse?
It's going to get
Do you
worse.
think there's going to be a lot of others aligning themselves with this insurgency that would be coming? It's a spark that's going to pick up a lot of other people. And do you think it'll ever get to the point where it will really be able to challenge the dominance of the United States of America, which has been led into a quagmire that is revealing a lack of a vision that this future requires? And is the vision ever to come, or can it come from somewhere out of this mass movement or not? Or is
Well, what
that
happened
too
to the Roman Empire?
idealistic?
What happened to the Roman
Well,
Empire?
that was invaded by barbarians in the end when they fell apart.
Well, we called them barbarians, but I mean, were they barbarians? I mean,
Where is the signs?
who were the barbarians?
where are the where are the signs of hope? Let's say we can talk tactical nuclear weapons. We can destroy the species. We are getting arrogant beyond all belief. We think that kind of thing. But where are the signs of the hope? For those who were Marxists, had a great hope in the fact of Karl Marx's critique of the capitalist system. It all comes down to economics in a certain sense in the end, economic theory maybe, everything. Where are the counterpoint beginnings of something that would be able to be relevant to the future in a vision way that can get the attention and the allegiance of the vast majority of the people of the world, which does not seem to be working now with our vision that we're trying to impose upon people? Is it anywhere to be found, or are we doomed?
I think it's going to be found after the big catastrophe, after the situation blows. I think it's going to be so terrible that the people who are left will make a change, make a
Blade Runner time, is that?
Something like that.
You think it's going to be that? You think well, there are one of the big supports for the neocons and for Mr. Bush and company that are doing this thing. They've really radicalized things and taken it into this kind of course. Whether they're going to come a cropper or whether they're going to be answerable or anything, people will flock to authority when they're frightened, and there's a lot of people frightened now and so forth, and they're being drummed up the propaganda just like the Nazis did and that sort of thing. And they can get themselves into that kind of a state, but that's all on the negative side. And there was isn't it possible the United States could represent something somehow, or the United States or the civilized world or the could represent or could think their way through to something that is relevant rather than the model that's being foisted?
Well, it's
now?
possible, but I don't see it happening.
You don't see it happening anywhere. If it were to come, is there any hope? Where would we go to find, theoretically, where would we go to try and find glimmerings of something that might be relevant to a good outcome for the world? I got four grandchildren now, almost, and so that there is something that's going to be a little bit, it's going to be able to tap because we have a tremendous capability, don't we, of making the world work for everybody. And where is it going to come from?
Well, I think it's going to come from a transformation at an energy level.
At an
but
energy,
I don't mean oil. I mean, it's like
a rise of consciousness.
Like a rise of consciousness.
Yeah, we said Teilhard de Chardin. We both agree.
Yeah.
An omega point. We may be converging and getting to an omega point.
But I think it's going to collapse first before that happens, and the collapse may be part of the rise.
I see. Are you thinking over centuries now, or are you thinking longer?
Well, I don't know.
Our lifetime?
I don't know. I would hope that it would happen in our lifetime, but maybe it'll take centuries. I don't know. I don't. You see, it's something that I sense, but I don't really know how to describe it because I can't quite visualize it.
I understand.
It's something that I sense.
It's like Bobby Dylan said, it's blowing in the wind.
It's blowing in the wind.
But on the other hand, in evolutionary and punctuated equilibrium in evolution, when you have something new happen, we've been here 200,000 years and we've come to the point where we can destroy the whole species. And in a pregnancy, if you go to Gaia or Lovelock or Chardin or something, if you go to a rise of consciousness, there was a consciousness before Homo sapien, Australopithecine, and there will be a consciousness in our relationship to the broader cosmos, transcendent to what we've been, all our institutions have been predicated. Are we in that kind of an order where it's requiring altered consciousness on a big paradigm sense in terms of transcending 200,000 years of human history? Maybe, I think there's some hint of that, maybe in that we can get an ontologic understanding that we've transcended scarcity as a reality for underpinning all of our institutions. That would be horribly disruptive of human institutions, but it might be the averse from the destructive scenario that we seem heading for. And when you say destructive, that's like John, Revelations, Armageddon, and all of these people who support Bush from the evangelical people who think that we're going to have things played out according to the Bible's evangelical view of Armageddon, and the forces of evil will finally come, and then we will triumph. But Armageddon now means the end of the day.
Bush opens his bid for a second term. The critical flaws in the voting machine that did away with the hanging chad.
And the 10% or the 100%.
I think that's possible. I'm not saying it's probable, but it's possible. Because I don't see anything stopping this from happening.
You don't.
It's like I see this train that's going down the track, and I don't see anyone stopping
Maybe the neocons should be applauded for trying. They're saying
Trying
we're
what?
trying to make some sort of an assertion of American or Western civilizing values upon the world.
The
You know?
neocons have been trying to destroy the Arabs because of Israel. No, it has nothing to do
You
with
think it's
civilization.
because you think that?
The United States or anything else.
To protect Israel.
Not to protect Israel, to help Israel, you know, get larger.
Uh-huh.
Meaning there is this greater Israel idea in, you know, in Israel.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I think that that's part of, I think that's the ethos of the whole thing.
of the neocons as a whole, you would associate it with that, right? Because I think of it in
yeah.
terms of fundamentalist economic philosophy and that sort of thing. I may be wrong.
Well, it
but
is. It's
it's
control
sort of-
over more of the economy. They want Israel would love to control the oil and so on. So how do they do
Well,
it?
so in any power people who
Yeah.
want to, who get successful, who want to have
But
a
it's
greater
a small
control.
country that
and-
wants to be a big country.
Well, there's
It has-
some,
you know,
yeah,
wants
okay.
to have big power,
Yeah.
and that's what's happening.
I think that's maybe a little too simplistic or something, because it's part of a broader Western civilization development. It's not just Israel, I think, although there is there, and that's a focus of that thing directly. It is there. The people on the television were looking at what goes on in Palestine and that sort of thing, and that's an issue. And if there's a mass uprising over there, it could play hell on the kinds of pressures that on Israel. If there was a united Arab something there about Israel, it could really be hell, and they've got a couple hundred atomic weapons. And they're very determined, and they have a strong sense of national. They suffered terribly. They built up this love of Zionism and this idea and that sort of thing. So that could be a real flashpoint of concern and confrontation there more than others, although it would come up against Europe.
That's the reason we're
if you
interested in the
extend
Middle
it
East.
beyond.
Yeah.
Well, we're interested also, they got a lot of oil.
No, but I mean in this sense, meaning the oil was ours anyway.
Mhm.
Meaning who were these countries going to sell it to but to Europe and the
Yeah,
United
it's all
States?
going into the market. in a
So I mean,
certain-
it's not like they were going to take it somewhere else or
Well,
something.
I'm not sure. I think it's more of a
There is-
Western thing.
I mean, we
and that's a
control
Western
the West controls the refineries, the bank accounts. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like
Oh,
oil
yeah,
is
that's what
not
I'm
just
saying.
oil in the ground; it's
Yeah.
a whole industry.
It's the
I mean,
whole
so
it's
we
the whole
control-
neoliberal.
We
It's the
control
whole
the industry.
it's the whole neo-capitalism. It's a kind of
Yeah.
neo-capitalism that's there, which is being
So
run
there
by
was
the people.
no danger to our control of that oil.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm.
It's just who we have to deal with them. So, but it's a neo-capitalism that kind of has these kind of institutions, modern. It's a complex
But of course, you
question.
see, Chalabi had promised the Israelis that there would be they would reopen that oil pipeline
Mm.
from Mosul to Haifa,
Mm.
which was destroyed back in in the 40s, I guess.
And they destroyed that atomic
And
reactor up in
you know,
Iraq.
and then he forgot about the promise. But I mean, that was a big thing that the neocons were. I mean, the Defense Department was corresponding directly with the government of Israel without going through the State Department about that.
Yeah. Yeah, they're-
Wolfowitz's office.
Yeah, it's a very close tie there
Yeah.
with that. Yeah, that is, and that's part of that. Well, it's a huge thing, and I'm afraid as we sit here and talk, as power is handed over to the, one would hope that it could work. You know, that there would be a peaceful thing, and they could be beat into order. And
If I were an Iraqi, I would never accept a puppet government imposed by the United States.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry we've run out of time. This is a very crucial time. Happy to have been able to have the perceptions of Nita Renfrew, who knows well Iraq and so forth. And we're talking about the situation on the 28th, which supposedly sovereignty's handed over on Wednesday. I guess it was a long-term goal. It seems to me they've already started that process, and so this will air on the 5th of July, right after our Independence Day. So talking about the situation, and thank you really very much for coming in, all the work and so forth. And we in Conversation invite you. We're coming back again tomorrow, so we invite you to tune in. And once again, Nita, thanks a lot for coming in and for all your work.
Thank you, Harold.
Crucial time, you know, it's really hard to get. It'd be good if one, I guess there are a lot, it must be
cold
good
in
to be
here.
a person. Yeah.